We're live. Welcome to another edition of the Willie Bragg Show. I'm your host, Willie Bragg. Before we get started, to let you all know that to hit the like button here on YouTube and to subscribe and hit the notification bell to save all the trouble and all that from the beginning with the algorithms. You know how it goes with YouTube. Follow me on Twitch. Follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Facebook. All will be well. Today's guest is JB from the JB Fauntleroy Show and RBN. He needs no introduction, but let's introduce him. Introduce yourself, my friend.
Hey, how you doing? My name is JB Fauntleroy. It's good to see you. I'm also with the RBN, Revolutionary Blackout Network, and it's great to be here. And thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this all week. And by the way, Happy New Year. I think the last time we shared the same panel, New Year's Eve. So it's great seeing you here again.
Yeah, definitely. It was fun.
Yeah. Oh, yes. It's a great way to end the year. You know, I'm just like, wow. Okay, cool. So, yeah. So anyway, I guess we'll get started with, this online ecosystem that we both belong to, and I remember when RBN was called, Fred Hampton left this, I believe, about 2 years ago, and I guess we'll start with that, and then we'll go into everything else. So, for those who are new to this, to this online left here, can you tell us about how RBN and Fred Hampton leftists began?
Sure. So it was February or late February, early March of 2021, and so we, Nick would have streams. I think it was called the Black Rose Brigade, if I'm correct. And so he would invite different people on. He would invite people like myself, CJ. At the time, it was RJ, Jackie, one, to talk about in Rome and to talk about different things we have observed regarding politics and the world. And so it got to a point where we thought to ourselves, and this was really an idea that was brought about through Nick, CJ, and Rome. Why don't we make a channel, do it panel style, sort of like the Young Turks, and have it geared towards not just left issues, but also Black issues as well. Because as far as seeing somebody who is pro-Black as well as putting themselves out there as anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, you really didn't see too much of that. I mean, the only major voices that were Black that we really saw were people like Tim Black as well as Nico House. And so there wasn't really that big of a lane that was carved out. So we decided to come together, kind of like Voltron, and create this channel called the Fred Hampton Leftist. And we wanted to model our beliefs from Fred Hampton, the Black Panther Party, and many other revolutionaries who were also anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, and pro-Black liberation. So from that, we birthed the Fred Hampton Leftist, and that was on April 1st of 2021. Of course, that was no April Fool's joke. It was for real. And so we created that. And it was a success because we actually announced it a month beforehand that we were creating this channel. And then we had our launch on that day. So it was great because the thing is that how many people do you get to hear that perspective on the Black community, how the Black community is affected by our foreign policy abroad, and how, it has a bearing on how we are treated within this nation. And a lot of people really aren't connecting those dots. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it was also so successful, because it was a new perspective that many people just haven't heard before, outside of people like Nico House.
It was probably I would say probably spring, maybe summer 2021, when I bumped across Fred Hampton Leftist. And I started listening to the program at the time, and you're right. When it came to the online left ecosystem, it seems like prior to that, all existed was Nico House, who I listened to quite a bit, and I used to listen to Tim Black back in the day. Got a little more mainstream, but I mean, I still listen to him too. And that was seems like that was all that was around, and it was pretty much like 95% white, and I mean, and so I was glad to see a little more diversity happen on the online left, and it seems to be getting a little more diverse now. But the gatekeepers, the larger ones, your TYTs and your Sam Cedars, they gotten kind of far on the right, and I don't really listen to them anymore because they're out of touch and all of that and everything. So no, but I am a big fan of RBN, and I love the work y'all do. I mean, I love the work y'all do. I can't get enough of it. And, thank you. I think Savvy Sabs is now up there. Compton J wasn't Kamali Rose wasn't he for a while contributing?
Yes, he was a member at one time, but we had parted ways.
Okay, yeah, because I don't really hear much from Kamali Rose anymore, because I used to listen to his show when I first got online and started doing this in early 2020 during, when I started doing this, and I just had a handful of like 20 subscribers. And all that. So okay, well, that's and that's what I like. I like the fact that it is programs like explicitly anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, that talks about the Black agenda and what is good for the Black agenda. Believe it or not, I'll tell people it's good for everybody too. So I mean, and I just and I really appreciate the work that's done and all of that, and the awareness that's made and everything. Any plans for the I guess any plans in a few weeks for Black History Month with regard to RBN? Any projects?
It's interesting you ask that question, because a lot of times people talk about Black History Month, and the gripe among the Black community is, why do we only get a month and we get the shortest month of the year? But I honestly think that is kind of indicative of how we're viewed anyway within the country, is that a a month is dedicated to learning Black history instead of it being fully incorporated into our curriculum. Black history is American history.
Yes, it is.
And it's just like, for instance, talking about indigenous Americans are part of our history, or even talking about, for instance, I was referring to wanting to reach out to different people who are from Puerto Rico. And Puerto Rican history is American history, because if you go back to, the Puerto Rican history is incorporated into our country's history. So that should also be incorporated. While we're learning about people like George Washington, we should be learning about Benjamin Banneker. While we're learning about the presidents like John F. Kennedy, we should be learning about people like Fannie Lou Hamer. And we should be learning about people like not just Martin Luther King Jr., but also the people who were intrinsic, part of different organizations that were for Black liberation. We should be learning about them. And unfortunately, it's pretty much limited to just a small group. And then even on top of that, they're whitewashed. And so I would like to bring out more voices that have fallen by the wayside as far as Black History Month. But as far as Black history, we try to incorporate that or talk about it a little bit more. I'm trying to do it more, especially on my channel as well.
Yeah, well, one thing that I have noticed within Black History Month are certain figures that are excluded from Black History Month. Like two notable figures, and I'm a socialist, of course, and I come out of the Eugene Debs, Norman Thomas tradition of the old Socialist Party of America, and so two figures that are prominent from the Civil Rights Movement, and one could say he might have been like a predecessor to Martin Luther King, but he doesn't really get a lot of mention. Was A. Philip Randolph of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. And what he did in labor organizing did a lot to create a Black middle class, or develop a Black middle class in a significant way. And Bayard Rustin, who helped formulate, MLK formulate a strategy of pacifism and to do the pacifist method for civil rights and everything. And he also does not get enough credit or enough acknowledgement too. And I just kind of noticed that, and the labor connection to the movement seems to be kind of whitewashed as well. Have you noticed that?
Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that Bayard Rustin was actually one of the chief architects of the March on Washington back in, I think it was 1964 or 1963. Yeah. So the thing is that a lot of people don't realize that. And also Bayard Rustin was actually a queer man. He was gay. And so a lot of people don't realize that. So if you actually want to go towards gay history, of course, we should, be propping up the Marsha P. Johnsons as well, because people, without people like her, we wouldn't have, a lot of the freedoms that we do have, or I should put freedoms in air quotes, because these freedoms are afforded by the Supreme Court, which can be overturned easily. But the freedoms that we do have is partially because of people like Marsha P. Johnson and Bayard Rustin, because of the work that they did. And people don't realize that queer and LGBTQ plus history is also American history, which is not talked about much. Forget talking about it here, especially in red states, but it doesn't really get talked about in blue states either. But yeah, so I think that these historical figures do not get discussed, and as well as their economic and political affiliations do not get discussed as much. Like, for instance, people don't realize that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a socialist. He was an anti-capitalist. Same thing with Malcolm X. pretty much all of our major historical figures that are part of Black liberation and civil rights are anti-capitalist. And what people don't realize is that is really the part of the crux as to why we push for our liberation, is because we realized that we were subject under slavery and Jim Crow because of capitalism. So this is one of the reasons why we say, why are we going to cling to a system that subjugated us to cruelty? So I think it's something that needs to be talked about more, and I'm glad to talk about that more often, not just on RBN, but also on my channel as well.
Actually, a lot of people are not aware about but in 1943, A. Philip Randolph actually attempted to do a march on Washington for civil rights during World War II. And Franklin Roosevelt was sympathetic, but he felt it was too risky to fight for civil rights at the time, and that was definitely a flaw, along with the internment of Japanese Americans in the camps. And that was, if there's anything to criticize FDR for, was what he did to Japanese Americans. I mean, that you know, I mean, might not be to the level of the Holocaust in Germany, but it was still a cruel and evil to put the Japanese in these camps. But there was an attempt that marched on Washington that was being organized in 1943 for civil rights and racial equality for African Americans and all people. FDR basically pleaded with A. Philip Randolph to call off the march, and he told him, if you call off the march, I will sign an executive order to desegregate D.C. So in World War II, right there in the middle of World War II, Washington, D.C. was desegregated by executive order. It was a small victory, and it was a very small victory. Didn't go anywhere near far enough, but one could say that might have been one of several little sparks that kind of started a flame toward a positive direction. And we're still fighting toward, the fight isn't over, but yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
As we can see, the fight still rages on because we feel ourselves backsliding towards more rapacious and repressive different types of policies. The only difference is that now it's starting to affect more working and poor white people as well, and so now they're feeling the sting. And so this is why it is so important for us to have a coalition together in order to get rid of these systems that are plaguing us, because really Black people are the canary in the coal mine. If they're going to do it to us, then they're going to do it to poor whites as well. And they are now doing it to them, and now they are starting to see what they could be subject to as well. You know, we now have not just slavery, but now we have wage slavery, and there's a lot of white people that are subject to that. White people are now being subject to the carceral state, just like we were, and we continue to be. So now they are experiencing that slavery within the system as well. So this is one of the reasons why coalitions are extremely important. It harkens me back to the coalition, the Rainbow Coalition between the Black Panthers, the Young Patriots, and the Young Lords from back then. And this Rainbow Coalition was considered extremely dangerous by the institutions, the alphabet institution, bureaucracies, as it were, of the government, because this means that it threatened the power of a lot of the oligarchs which own our government and run our country. So this is why we have to continue to create these coalitions, because if they are that dangerous for them, that means it's something that will absolutely work, and that we can actually change it so we can have a more egalitarian, equitable, and equal society.
Yeah, 2 points that you brought out, and I'll to address one with regard to with regard to the injustice being done to the African American community is also being done to poor whites. And one area where that's happening, and you mentioned incarceration and all that, is one issue in criminal justice. The police brutality, without question, is horrible, and there's been a lot of lies made by the right-wing media in this country about what Black Lives Matter is and is not, and all that. And one area that's not addressed is the issue of capital punishment, because I think that capital punishment is basically like the very last extension of what I call organized institutional lynching. Yeah, white people are executed too. I understand that, but percentage wise, it is usually people of color, and that seems to be who they go after more than anybody else when it comes to criminal justice. And it's always been one of the biggest reasons why I oppose capital punishment. And somebody said, well, what if you can make it with the death penalty race neutral? I tell them I still be opposed to capital punishment anyway. So it makes no difference. But that is the number one reason it needs to be, in my view, it needs to be abolished. And it's also interesting you mentioned the alphabet soup agencies, because we have a lot of people, and I can say this because I'm not monetized, I can use the word. We have a lot of shit libs that were critical of the national security state and its domestic covert agencies for many years, and they lost that old-fashioned civil libertarian sentiment of what the covert, state can do to a population, and we're being surveillance nonstop and all of that. But while I'm no fan of Donald Trump and whatever with the FBI going into Mar-a-Lago a few months ago, and if he's guilty, prosecute. I understand that, but here's the thing: should we be cheering the same FBI that actually made a lot of trouble, not just for African American organizations trying to achieve liberation in the 1960s, but even the broader left through COINTELPRO, that actually created dissent among the left to try to destroy the left. And it still exists to this day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you don't even have to go that far back. Because remember that 1 week before the FBI did a raid on Mar-a-Lago against Donald Trump, the FBI also committed a raid against the African People's Socialist Party as well. And they did flashbangs and came out with guns drawn at the home of Chairman Omali Yeshitela. And so what does the African People's Socialist Party do? They said they were in league with Russia for some reason, which is absolutely patently false. And the fact that they, use that in order to go up against them shows that they are constantly committing atrocities, especially against Pan-African, Black liberation movements that are trying to be a challenge and a check to power, especially capitalist power. Look at, what they did to Fred Hampton. They literally killed him in his sleep so that they could stop or at least give a cardiac arrest to the Black Panther Party. They have done it to the Black Liberation Party. In fact, look at what they did to people like, I'm reading her book, Assata Shakur. They put her basically in prison on trumped up charges for bank robberies, as well as for accusing her of killing a New Jersey state trooper, which was also patently false. And so this is constantly used in order to arrest and indict and declare guilty, not just in our actual courts, but in the court of public opinion, to paint them as overly radical, dangerous people who only mean to do harm, when that is also not true. And one of the things a lot of people don't realize is one of the reasons for gun reform in this country was really because of people like Ronald Reagan. Yes, the Republican Ronald Reagan, when he was governor of California, was spooked and scared because the Black Panther Party wanted to police their own communities, and they brandished their firearms, assault rifles, in order to send a message to let people know that do not, mess with our community, meaning do not try to cause terror, which the police were doing to community, and that we are protecting our people. And so because of that, the former governor Reagan decided to implement gun control on the nation, because before that they were fine with guns, but then after that, then they wanted to institute gun control.
That's a fair point, and I forgot about that. And it is true, exactly true what you said about Governor Ronald Reagan. And a lot of people on the, not making it a partisan issue, but a lot of Republicans who bow down toward Ronald Reagan like he's some kind of god or something. And I'm a Generation X person. And I just remember how a lot of people just loved Ronald Reagan throughout my life. And the guy that the NRA just revere more than anybody else is the one person that kind of started this gun control movement to begin with, and which is gun control is another issue. But I would say I will make a working class claim, and I will make a liberation claim for all people who are with the alt-right going as crazy as they are. That is within. Not that I espouse violence, but I do believe in self-defense. And so let's put it this way: if there would have been a Medicare for all march and people would have had ammunition, or if Donald Trump would have been reelected and there would have been a January 6th with lefties and Antifa and Black Lives Matter with guns, you would see Republicans calling for gun control at that point. Honestly. And there would have been a lot of dead people. There would have been a lot of dead bodies out there. Let's face it. That's how it operates. The double standard of how it operates. I'm from North Carolina. Greensboro massacre in 1979. Well, that injustice still plagues this state to this day.
Yeah, I mean, look. We can get to massacres too. We can talk about the Ocoee massacre that happened, and Ocoee is not too far from me here in Central Florida. And the Ocoee massacre happened because Black people actually dared to vote. So that happened. There's so many massacres, but and one of the things, if we're going to talk about gun control, I respect and understand the people who talk about common sense gun control because of guns constantly getting in the hands of wrong people, and then they commit atrocities. But I find it interesting how people want to talk about gun control for citizens, but they never want to talk about gun control for police. Because the thing is that they're the ones who are constantly killing us day by day. There's at least 6 Black people each day, or 6 people each day being killed by police. A lot of times we are unarmed and we are not actually a threat, and yet police constantly get to kill us with impunity. So I would love to see more gun control being talked about by police, but that also means demilitarizing and defunding the police, which is something I'm a huge proponent of, because really they are an antithesis to public safety. They're an anathema to public safety. So we do not need the police as we see it today. We actually need a rethinking of public safety. And so while I do agree that guns are a problem in this country, one of the biggest entities that carry guns that is also a danger to our country are police.
Now, speaking of the police, it looks more the police force in this country looks more like they're about ready to fight down the streets of Baghdad, Iraq, or Kabul, Afghanistan, than they do old TV shows like Adam 12 or Andy Griffith. I mean, honestly, there's no reason for the police to have, Pentagon style goodies at their disposal. I mean, they're and that's no. But the only thing I don't have a problem with bulletproof vests. I mean, I don't want anybody. Sure. I mean, I don't want anybody getting killed. So yeah, I don't have a problem with bulletproof vests. But other than that, there's no reason to have these machine guns and these vehicles that spray water at protesters and all of that that you see occasionally and all that. All this. I mean, the military-industrial complex seems to be tied in with local law enforcement, and that's ridiculous.
Well, I mean, yeah, of course, but that's all a part of capitalism. Because in order to create more profits, they need to sell these things to local law enforcement. Why are military companies selling guns, ammunition, and different means of committing warfare to our local law enforcement? That should not be. And yet here we are. It is because they need to expand in order to create more profits. This is also the reason why we're expanding to war. This is one of the reasons why we are literally selling weapons to Saudi Arabia as they commit this proxy war in Yemen, killing thousands upon thousands, starving thousands of children abroad, all because they want to bomb places like Yemen. This is one of the reasons why we are having the proxy war in Ukraine. The proxy war in Ukraine isn't necessarily about going against Russia, though in part it is, because really the United States wants to get the resources out of Russia. That's primarily what it is. But another reason why they're also in Russia is because in Ukraine is because they want to sell more weapons in order to fight, but they want to spill Ukrainian blood instead of American blood so that they won't say, oh, we're in another war. We're saying that we're just helping out the Ukrainians, when really, in all actuality, we're actually giving weapons to essentially Nazi militias that populate a huge part of the Ukrainian army. And so the companies like Northrop Grumman and Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and Boeing, they're making a killing off of these proxy wars, because really that every single gun, every single bullet that's shot, every single bomb that's used, every single drone that's used, it is more money towards the military industrial complex. And these same ammunitions, guns, munitions, and ballistics that are used against them abroad are also now being used against us here within the homeland. And because they're being used against us here in the homeland, that's more money and profits for the military industrial complex too.
Oh yeah. Oh gosh. With regard to Saudi Arabia, I have been talking about that for years, and how the United States sit there and just indirectly, I'm going to say indirectly, and there is sometimes there are people in Congress. There's a few people in Congress that will call out on it, but they're not calling out on it enough, because they're scared their political careers will be down the tubes for doing so. But I mean, there's an actual genocide that the United States is contributing to in Yemen by through Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia, the United States coddles Saudi Arabia, which contributes to more terrorism against the West than Iran, which does next to nothing in terms of terrorism against the West. But we treat Iran and Syria as if they're like the worst players around. And in spite of how religious Iran is, there's more secularism in Iran than there is in Saudi Arabia. And so it's really puzzling how America kind of do their foreign policy. When Trump was president, you had John Bolton, who's running for president, by the way, calling to embrace Al-Qaeda to bring down Assad, a man who protects Christians, who protects Jewish people, protects Muslims from all killing each other in Syria, and Syria is definitely secular under Assad, and so why in the hell are they demonizing Syria and all that is beyond me too. And Ukraine, since 2014 when they toppled the government of Ukraine through the CIA, and I remember when the whole Nazi business, finding out that there were Nazis in the government of Ukraine and all that. Now you'd sit there and talk to a shit lib about it, and they're like, "Oh, there's just maybe a couple of privates in the army." Like, oh my God, really? We got Nazis in Idaho, so this is the same thing. No, it's not the same thing. You got military officers who are neo-Nazis. You got some of them who are cabinet ministers in the government. You got streets named after a Nazi collaborator named Stefan Bandera. I mean, and I'm not saying Putin is a saint, but there's a lot that's wrong with that Zelensky government, and for the United States to sit there and fork over those billions of dollars the way they've been doing, and Zelensky demanding that the U.S. government put not a fan of Rand Paul, but put Rand Paul on a blacklist, put Tulsi Gabbard on a blacklist, put Glenn Greenwald on a blacklist, his wife preventing, pressuring the Web Summit in Portugal to ban the gray zone. I mean, I have a problem with Ukraine and our money going there.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, first of all, if we're going to talk about John Bolton, nobody should be giving any type of credence or advice from Darth Walrus. I'm telling you right now, because Darth Walrus, that's what I like to call him, he is a war criminal. So therefore, nobody should be listening to a word that he has to say. Also, while we're at it, we're going to talk about the U.S. foreign policy. The U.S. foreign policy is one of the reasons why we have so many people that are coming to our borders seeking asylum because of the sanctions that are being committed against Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, among other countries. And so, yeah, we can give free reign for Ukrainians to come and move here to the United States because they're blonde-haired and blue-eyed, but let some brown people from Venezuela, Cuba, or Nicaragua come to our borders seeking asylum. And then Joe Biden just recently said, if you're trying to come here, don't show up to the border unless you actually did all the paperwork that you were supposed to do while you were in your country. My dude, my brother in Thor, why are you telling people to do that when they're seeking asylum? That's the exact... You're basically trying to get them to go through the regular channels versus asylum seeking. What's the point? Because they're literally trying to run away from danger. And so, our U.S. foreign policy that's going on right now, the United States is literally trying to cause World War III with China by trying to incite that they want to protect Taiwan. And it's crazy because Taiwan is part of China. Trying to protect Taiwan is, or say that China is invading Taiwan, it's like saying the United States is invading, it's invading Hawaii, or it's like invading Alaska. It doesn't make any sense. How can we invade something that's already ours? You know what I mean? How is the United States going to invade Puerto Rico or the U.S. Virgin Islands? It's just crazy to say something like that. So the United States is constantly trying to look for more wars abroad so that they can create more money and profit for the military industrial complex. Like, for instance, I am not a fan of Putin. Putin is an anti-communist. He's an anti-socialist.
Homophobic.
He's homophobic. Putin needs to go as well. But to say that Putin is the worst of the worst without you're overlooking the crimes against humanity that people like Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, and Bill Clinton have done, I have a diamond encrusted bridge to sell you over an active volcano if you think that somehow he is worse than them, because he is not. They are actually worse than him. They have committed a major atrocities across the world. Have we forgotten Abu Ghraib? Have we forgotten that? Have we forgotten, Guantanamo Bay? Have we forgotten a lot of these atrocities that are constantly being brought up? We're constantly having to be reminded of. People are now whitewashing George W. Bush.
Yes.
Are you kidding me right now? 2 million Iraqis killed during the Iraq War?
And he's worse than Trump, believe it or not. He's to the right. He was to the right of Donald Trump.
Yeah. And the thing is, I said it on RBN Live today. I will say it on your show as well. If you took some Cheeto powder and threw it on Joe Biden's face, you get Donald Trump. That's basically what Donald Trump is. He's just Joe Biden in orange face. And so, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, no, go ahead. I was going to say, he did say there was not going to be any fundamental changes, Joe Biden.
Well, I mean, there was some fundamental changes. He actually made things worse. And the thing is that Barack Obama did things horribly, Donald Trump escalated, and now Joe Biden's escalating past Donald Trump. But the problem, though, that a lot of people don't realize is a lot of what Joe Biden is doing is making Donald Trump's policies acceptable, because Joe Biden is still continuing the policies of Donald Trump. So here's the crazy part, and this is what wilds me out. You have a lot of partisans that are on the right that'll talk about how bad Joe Biden is. And it's like, wait a minute, dude, you got another 4 years of Donald Trump. You just didn't get it with Donald Trump. What are you complaining about? You guys,
I want up on that.
Okay, go ahead.
We're the 11th term of the Reagan presidency. This is the 11th term. So
the 11th term of a racist, 11th term of a warmonger. And so when people on the right talk about, oh man, Joe Biden has open borders. No, he doesn't. In fact, he's actually deported more people than Donald Trump has.
That is true.
He has kept Title 42. So people who automatically sit there and think, oh, Joe Biden is to the left. No, he is not. In fact, Joe Biden is to the right of Donald Trump. That's how bad Joe Biden is. Just because he smiles in the face and he says, oh, healthcare is a human right, he doesn't actually mean it. He'll talk about, oh, LGBTQ rights are rights. No, he actually doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe in Roe v. Wade because he never codified it. He never worked to codify it. Barack Obama doesn't believe in Roe v. Wade because he actually talked about codifying it into law, and then he skipped out on it. Nancy Pelosi doesn't believe in Roe v. Wade as well. She doesn't believe in rights for women's bodies, because if she did, then she would have tried to call for it as much as she possibly could as Speaker of the House, but she didn't. And so for people to sit here and talk about how the Democratic Party is somehow or slightly better than the Republican Party, no, they aren't. Because just because they say what they believe, doesn't mean they actually will actively pursue what they believe. It's just like someone telling you, I love you. They're saying I love you just to get in your pants, but do they really love you? No, because they don't actually actively demonstrate that. So people need to stop believing the stripper, so to speak, and start actually realizing and looking with their eyes and seeing what the Democratic Party does. They're basically just teammates of the Republican Party.
I used to be a Democrat a long time ago, and the last president I voted for, and that was in 1992, was Bill Clinton, and I regretted that vote to this day. I wish I would have voted third party back then. I stress independence, and I mean I have I've voted Democrat as on a part-time basis for many years, selectively, strategically, and I don't even do that anymore because it's just kind of like it's kind of like, you know, even someone like an AOC will let us down, as it turned out, and you know, and I am so angry with the squad. It's one thing that they decided not to do force a vote for strategic reasons, and I'm still pissed that they didn't. But when they go and vote it like Ronald, and they vote to bust a rail strike, which is equivalent to busting the air traffic controllers in 1981, or Margaret Thatcher in the UK busting the miners, the coal miners in the 1980s. I mean, that's how serious of a letdown AOC was to me in that regard, and not to objectify. I'm not going to make an excuse for just a pretty face anymore. I mean, AOC, she's let me down so many times. She will sit there and talk a great game, and it'd be like, oh, yeah, she's really based what she says, and then she goes and votes like Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah.
She voted against the Iron Dome, and then Nancy Pelosi, like a second grade teacher scolding a child, went and pecked on her. Then she went and cried and voted the president. I'm like, what the fuck, you know?
Mama Bear roared, and she got scared. That's what happened. Yeah,
she's a wimp. I mean, and she's got a likable persona, but a likable persona is not giving us medical care. It's not creating more unions. It's not raising our wages, you know? And
all politicians are likable. That's why they're politicians, you know? And he kind of reminded me of something that Michael Parenti said. Long live Michael Parenti. Michael Parenti is based. But one of the things he said, and he cracked me up with this. Michael Parenti said that Margaret Thatcher is just Ronald Reagan in drag. And when he said that, I about died. But it's true. And the thing is, Margaret Thatcher was one of the worst. Liz Truss was one of the worst. Because, you know, they are of a disenfranchised community doesn't mean that they still won't, you know, hold up the empire. People like Barack Obama, just because he's black doesn't mean he still doesn't hold up the empire. And, you know, people like AOC, of course, you know, a lot of people actually had believed in her. They thought that she was going to be the one, the only, and not the only, but she going to cause a ruckus, as she said, within the Democratic Party. And she ended up capitulating and just acquiescing to the demands of the corporate Democrats. And she became basically a co-conspirator of what the Democratic Party is doing against us working people. In fact, when was the last time she actually talked about Medicare for all? You know,
she's scared to talk about it because that sore subject of force of vote would come back to haunt her. And do you notice how the gatekeepers and the independent media this past week doubled down after that storm that we saw with the Republicans this week? I hate the so-called Freedom Caucus, but I respect them more than the squad for this reason. They did to Kevin McCarthy what the squad needed to do to Nancy Pelosi. Yes. They made his life a living hell. And I have said this, and a lot of mainstream liberals get mad at me when I tell them this. I've been like, yeah, that's what the squad and Bernie needed to do. They needed to go in there and they needed to make the Democratic leadership's life a living hell. They're not our friends. Make their lives a living hell. If you're going to go and work within the Democratic Party, go cause that ruckus. Make their lives a living hell. And so what if they're going to write you off as the next Ralph Nader? There's nothing wrong with Ralph Nader, you know. Yeah. But there's a whole lot wrong with Bill Clinton and Al Gore, and there's a whole lot wrong with Joe Lieberman and Joe Manchin, and she just left the Democratic Party, but she's still part of the problem. Kirsten Sinema.
Yeah. You're absolutely correct. What's sad is that the Democratic Party, and more specifically, the Progressive Caucus, they failed to do what they said that they were going to do. It is sad that the Freedom Caucus has more intestinal fortitude than the progressives, aka the squad. It is sad the fact that they will bend to the will of leadership instead of becoming leaders themselves and actually put forth a fight for the working people. This tells us everything we need to know. The fact that they refuse to put up a fight, and then when we show people or point to people who actually put up a fight, even if they are their enemy, they will look at them and say, oh, well, no, that's just bad because now the Republican Party is in disarray. The crazy part is a lot of people who are part of what I like to call the legacy left, they will say, and they have been saying this, and this was actually echoed by Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks. She said, well, even if they forced to vote, what would they accomplish? We still wouldn't get it Medicare for all. The crazy part is they are misrepresenting the strategy of Medicare for all. And I said this to CJ in a stream, and I will bring this analogy back. Forcing the vote is like me saying to a gentleman, so how many years have you been beating your wife? And it puts the gentleman in a awkward position. Because if he says he doesn't beat his wife, that means he's denying the fact that he beats his wife. And people will say, well, of course he's going to deny it because, he doesn't want to look bad. Or if he admits to it, then he actually admits to beating his wife. So he's basically put in between a rock and a hard place. That's what forced to vote does. It puts the Democrats in between a rock and a hard place. Meaning that if they vote against Medicare for all, then it shows that they are just a bunch of corporate shills, including the people who say they support Medicare for all, including the people who are co-sponsors of it. And then on top of it, if they do vote for it, then now they're on record for voting for it. And so it's like, okay, so you guys voted for it before. Why once you voted for it next time? So now it's putting them on the line because you actually have a Democratic House, a democratically controlled Senate, and you also have the presidency. And guess what? This puts them on the hook. So let's say it passes the House. Hypothetically, let's say it passes the House and the Senate. Guess what? That puts Biden on the hook. So now you're going to see Biden as the enemy. So then once we have another Democratic primary, we can actually have a Democrat primary Joe Biden, say, Joe Biden voted against universal health care during the pandemic. Is this somebody you actually want? Because realize over 80% of Democrats actually want Medicare for all. Over 60% of independents and over 50% of Republicans actually want a single-payer healthcare system. So really, there's basically the entirety of the United States actually is in favor of a single-payer healthcare system. So putting them there is putting them between a rock and a hard place, basically saying, I dare you to vote against it. And they will, because we count on them being who they are. You count on a snake being a snake. This is why it's like having a snake that's camouflage and you dangle a mouse in front of that camouflage snake. You know it's going to strike. You are counting on it. But the people who don't see it camouflage, you want them to see it. So that's why you dangle the mouse in front of them so that they will strike. So that when they do strike, you'll go, see, they're a snake. This is why you need to primary them out or vote third party. I see you guys have Delilah Barrios in the chat. Hey, Delilah, she was running for governor of Texas under the Green Party. So then some of the progressives could have said, you know what? We're not down for anybody who's running in Texas under the Democratic Party. We're going to stand in solidarity with somebody who's running in the Green Party because they actually are more for what we want than some of these people in the Democratic Party. They could have actually displayed solidarity with them and then uplifted them too, because it's about the policy, not the party. But
absolutely, and the thing about it is that we look at Bernie Sanders. I'm just really angry. Well, I'm just, you're talking about somebody, and I've said this. Everybody who knows me knows this. I was probably the very first online Bernie bro, going back to the 1990s. I was one of those. Okay. Yeah, I was way back. So, 2016, 2020, I was probably, there's no probably, I was one of those obnoxious Bernie Sanders supporters online.
I get it.
I lost a lot of friends in 2016 in that election because of Bernie Sanders, because a lot of people were telling me I'm some kind of sexist because I wouldn't support Hillary Clinton. I didn't support Hillary Clinton because she didn't support the things that I supported, and they're trying to make it out like I'm with some kind of a misogynist, and they try to use the identity politics. I mean, be like, okay, I almost was tempted to tell them, and then you must be anti-Semitic if you don't support Bernie Sanders, then, right? I try to use a little backward psychology, or I was tempted to, but suffice to say, with Bernie Sanders bending his knee toward Joe Biden because of his empathy, he likes Joe Biden on a personal level. He's less hateful than Hillary Clinton in his tone. I get that. I get it. But, Joe Biden he was right there when the Democratic Leadership Council effectively Reaganized the Democratic Party in the 1990s. And the Democratic Party was horrible prior to the DLC coming in, doing what they did. And now Bernie Sanders has been reduced to being just a slightly edgier Democrat, and so I've been very disappointed with him. I don't want him to run in 2024. I maybe about a year ago I would have been like, yeah, run in 2024. Now I'm just kind of like, why bother?
Yeah, that field to burn got splashed by water, so there's no burn anymore.
There's no burn. There's no burn.
There's no burn. Yeah, and the fact that Bernie Sanders has basically bent the knee to the Democratic Party, it just shows that Bernie left us a long time ago. We're just now finding out. I reference when Sabs had on Jesse Ventura, former governor of Minnesota, on her show. And Jesse Ventura said back in 2016, Jesse Ventura came and approached Bernie Sanders while he was at a rally. And he asked Bernie, if you do not win the Democratic primary, will you promise to run as an independent against Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in the general election in order to win? And Bernie Sanders told him, no, he will be supporting Hillary Clinton if he loses the primary, which he did. So that just shows that already back in 2016, he was already beholden to the Democratic Party. We just didn't know it yet. We just had no idea because it was hidden. And so when he started to run in 2020, there was all this momentum behind him because people actually wanted this true change, and they thought that it was going to happen through Bernie Sanders, when really Bernie Sanders, all he was just making the Democratic Party more palatable to more workers because they were already disaffected from the party after seeing somebody like Hillary Clinton. Barack Obama was a massive failure, when really Barack Obama was actually a Trojan horse, because he made it seem like that he was for workers and working people back in 2008, when in reality, he was never for us. And that was indicative of who he put in his cabinet. You have people like Tim Geithner and Paul Volcker that he put inside of his cabinet, and they were people that were basically from Wall Street. And so somebody like Barack Obama was an enemy of the people, just like Donald Trump is. So it just goes to show that Bernie Sanders was threatening to primary Barack Obama back in 2012, but he backed off on that. And so it just shows that Bernie is a massive disappointment. But at the same time, really, I'm angry at myself because I didn't know more about Bernie or see the underpinnings of who Bernie really was back in the day. I just saw it now. So I'm mad at myself for not seeing it sooner, because Bernie pretty much has always been that way. We just didn't know.
Yeah. I wanted to, I got to go in a few minutes, but I wanted to talk about a point you brought earlier about the House Progressive Caucus, which I will never forgive Pramila Jayapal for what she did, even though I don't put too much. I mean, now there's a lot of people on the independent left that likes to give Nina Turner a hard time. I don't give her a hard time, but I don't at the same time I don't put too much emphasis anymore, since she's going to stay in the Democratic Party camp. But to see what happened to her twice, what happened to Bernie, and to choose Chantel Brown, who was part of the New Democrat coalition, and have her join the Progressive Caucus, which is supposed to be against everything that the Progressive Caucus stands for, tells me that the Progressive Caucus is just nothing but a book cover. It's nothing. It's just nothing with substance. And so I'm like, and I told a friend of mine, I was like, well, Pramila Jayapal, she's not any kind of ally for what she did, and urging everyone to endorse Chantel Brown over Nina Turner, and then to have AOC only support Nina Turner like the last 2 days before the primaries, and then have not just corporate Democrats but Republicans backing Chantel Brown over Nina Turner, and Nina Turner just sat there and taking that. And I'm like, and here's somebody that's supposed to be an heir apparent to Bernie Sanders, and and she, in that regard, she's been kind of a disappointment too. And I like her. I like her, but I just wish that she would go independent. Is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think that ship has sailed. As far as Nina Turner, Nina Turner will not be for the same things. Nina Turner going independent, that's not going to happen. It's sad to me to say, but as far as personality wise, I like Nina Turner, but as far as her policies, she is to the right of me, definitely. And she will not go against the Democratic Party because she's beholden to that apparatus. Hell, she's working with TYT now.
Oh, so, yeah. That turned out to be also a big disappointment too, because yeah. I mean, there was a time, maybe 2019 might have been the last time, 2020 maybe the last time I could watch the Young Turks and go, whoop, but between Forced to Vote and what they did to Jimmy Dore in the summer of 2021, I was just, and even Kyle Kalinske, who's less than perfect these days, they even fucked him over. So just like, I'm like, wash my hands from the Young Turks. I don't put too much thought in what if I do, I just usually make fun of them. So, yes. So,
well, yeah. So, I mean, Nina Turner, I feel like she's trying to. It feels like she's trying to stay within that. We just need to tweak some capitalistic things, get rid of for-profit healthcare and a couple other things. Like, for instance, I don't think she supports defund the police because her husband is a police officer, and I think her son's a police officer, so she doesn't support defund the police. As well as she just wants to reform the Democratic Party. She doesn't want to actually leave the party. So it is quite disappointing to me. So,
yep, and the Democratic Party can't be reformed. It's just the Democratic Party, the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans are the actual fascists in a lot of ways. And the Democrats are just a center-right party in the European sense of the word. I mean, they're the policies. I mean, Joe Biden, in many ways, is to the right of former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who praised the National Health Service for saving his life during COVID. And how odd for me to say that about a man that was supposed to be, Britain's Donald Trump with the wild hair and all of that. So, yeah, and that's sad. I mean, the Democratic Party's to the right of the British Conservative Party in a lot of ways. That's where we're at in the United States, the Overton window. But we're locked in a two-party system. So there's a lot of good people locked in a two-party system. They don't know what to do. And until we break this two-party system, we're going to get more of the same. So I would love to have you back on the show, maybe sometime in the near future. Let's talk to some of the people here on the chat line, and then I have to go to work in a short while. So let's see here. Anthony, hey, how are you doing? Let's see. We need critical changing. Excuse me. We need critical thinking. Says salute Willie Bragg TV conversation with JB Fauntleroy from JB Faunt and RBN. Jimmy from KRTD. Hello, how are you doing? Let's see. Kelly M says fam. All right, and we have Yankee Tanky. Hey Willie. Hey Yankee Tanky. Let's see here. We have abolish the death penalty, says Anthony. Here. Let's see. If one innocent person dies from wrongful charges, it's too many. I totally agree. Let's see. Free who, and I agree totally. What they did to the African People's Socialist Party's headquarters in Missouri, I believe it was very wrong from a few months ago. Yankee Tanky said, as Karl Marx says, under no pretext shall arms, ammunition be surrendered. Any attempt to disarm the workers must be frustrated by force if necessary. All right. Well, yeah. Democratize the police. Yeah, people tend to distort what defund the police means too, and that's another sad thing. And qualified immunity and pensions are subject to lawsuits. Okay. I try to get everybody as much as I can on these chat lines. Democratize the police, down with police brutality. Here. All right. And I actually saw some police brutality about 30 years ago myself when I was in college, and unfortunately, two people that were brutalized by the police ended up doing community service, and it pissed me off to this day. Prompts on Saudi Arabia trying to join BRICS and aligning with OPEC against the petrodollars, though. Yeah, but they do too much human rights abuse. So great, my man says already. Yeah, let's see. Base Assad. Yeah, and it's politically incorrect to say that in America, but I do agree. Assad is base. Honestly, it's a no-brainer. Why America is so against Assad when you think about what could replace it. Assad in Syria. Down with Ukraine. I am not a fan. I don't even put a Ukraine flag on my bios. I'm not judging people who do. I just don't. Well, love you guys. Let's see here. U.S. tortured Manning, Assange, and exiled Snowden. Yeah, I think that Assange will not come to the United States. They want Assange to die in Belmarsh. What do you think?
Oh yeah, they're trying to kill him because they want either to kill him there or they want to kill him here. Either or, they're trying to do it. So I
Yeah.
think it's horrible. He needs to be freed and he honestly needs to be honored for the work that he's done.
Yeah, because if they prosecute him under the Espionage Act, yeah, for the most part, our First Amendment rights are gone for the most part, but it will officially be gone. And there'll be no pretense if he's prosecuted for sure. Yeah. Yankee Tanky brought up a point about Nicaragua being based. The press secretary, let me tell you about her when she basically talked about the three communist countries, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela. And I'm like, has she taken a political science course? Because the only country that's really communist is Cuba. Venezuela's government is a more of a revolutionary left populist government, and Nicaragua is more social democratic. I mean, and so it's three flavors of the left, not one flavor. you know.
Yeah.
Let's see, all this intelligence and enhancing this on one screen, says Mortra. Thank you. Let's see. Just wait till Willie Rack puts me on the show. You will mail. Yes. Sometime in February, Yankee Tanky's coming up on the Willie Bragg show. Let's see. I got a couple of people lined up here. Let's see. Biden's to the right of Reagan. Well, Reagan pushed the Overton window to the right. That a lot of Democrats today are almost to the right of Reagan. Let's see. When people say Biden is a leftist, I understand I'm dealing with a child. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I hope you tell everybody I said hello on the next RBN. Let's see. I have to go to work and all that. So people will read the chat lines. Listen, it was a pleasure talking to you. And again, I hope you come back on the show. And I enjoyed this interview. And all the best to you. And hope that 2023 is going to be a great year for your program and for everybody involved.
Thank you so very much, and thank you for having me. It was good to be here.
Oh, absolutely. And so I guess until next time, I'm going to be signing off. So take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.